You paid good money for your MacBook, so it's only fair to expect it to last as long as possible. But most people are locked into a cycle of buying a new MacBook every 2 to 3 years, and it's because they miss a few simple but critical steps that wears out their MacBook way faster than expected. So in this video, I'm going to show you 5 simple steps that are guaranteed to make your MacBook last for many more years than you thought possible. Step 1 is something you do even before you get your MacBook, which is getting the correct amount of RAM. Now that Apple has made 16 gigabytes of RAM as standard on the MacBook lineup since the introduction of Apple Intelligence, you might be tempted to just keep it there and upgrade other specs instead. But here's the problem with that strategy. The amount of RAM can impact the speed of your operations. If you are a casual user and all you do is web browsing and some basic document editing, 16 gigabytes is more than enough. But if you plan on more advanced use cases like gaming, 3D modeling, running LLMs, or video editing, suddenly 16 gigabytes of RAM just won't cut it. For those use cases, you should consider bumping up the RAM to 32 gigabytes or 48 gigabytes and higher. Now, what does this have to do with keeping your MacBook last for a long time? When you have a bottleneck in your RAM, 2 things happen. First, your RAM will be continuously utilized, which means more battery usage and consequently more heat. Second, when your RAM can't keep up with the demands of your applications, your SSD will handle the overflow, which means more read-write cycles on your SSD, which then negatively impacts the life of your SSD. This is because SSDs are made up of millions of tiny transistors which are rated for a certain number of read-write cycles before degradation starts to happen. Now granted, this number is ridiculously high, something like 100,000 read-write cycles before your SSD starts having issues. But if you plan on having your MacBook for 5 or more years, suddenly all the extra read-write cycles add up to a big number. Compared to SSDs, your RAM doesn't have the same issue because it uses capacitors for storing information rather than transistors, so it can handle a lot more read-write cycles without degradation. By sizing up your RAM, you can extend the life of your SSD. The best way to determine your optimal RAM needs is to use Activity Monitor on your Mac and check the memory pressure during a typical workflow. If the memory pressure remains green, go with the same amount of RAM as your current Mac setup. If it's yellow or red, bump up the RAM to 32 gigabytes or 48 gigabytes or higher. When I got my M4 Pro MacBook Pro, I upgraded the RAM to 48 gigabytes to give myself more headroom because this MacBook is my all-in-one machine. And if you're coming from Windows, you're probably safe to configure your MacBook with the same amount of RAM as your current Windows machine, assuming that the Windows machine configuration was adequate for your daily use case. The second step is cleaning your SSD regularly. This one extends on the point I just made about read-write cycles. The more information you have stored on your SSD, the more read-write cycles your MacBook is going to make. Part of the reason is that macOS indexes all your files on a regular basis. This enables features like searching on Spotlight and searching in the Finder app. It also has to do with how macOS handles read-write requests. For example, from your perspective, if you want to open a document, you just double-click the file and it opens. But from macOS's perspective, it has to make a request to the SSD to retrieve that particular file and send it to the application so that you can use it. When the SSD gets this request, it has to parse through all the records to find that specific file. The more the number of records that need to be read through before finding your specific file, the more your SSD is utilized. This means more read-write cycles and more power utilization, which also means more heat. So every 6 months or so, go through your files and delete unused or obsolete files. Also consider moving files to external storage if you are unsure about deleting it. Apps like Clean My Mac are particularly helpful here because they will identify system-level and app-level cache files and other temporary files that might be hogging up your SSD, and you can just safely delete them. The third step is using the proper charger and charging cable. Depending on your MacBook, each model has its unique power requirements. Even within the Pro models, the M4 Pro and M4 Max variants have different power requirements. This is even true between sizes within the same model spec. For example, the 14-inch and 16-inch models have different power requirements. If the charger that you are using is undersized for your MacBook's power requirements, two things will happen. First, your MacBook will not get enough charge and simply not be able to charge back up. And second, the charger will likely overheat in its attempt to meet your MacBook's power needs. This is a recipe for smoking chargers and a fire hazard. On the other hand, if you are using the correct charger, but the charging cable is not rated for the power supply, it will overheat and potentially damage your MacBook. So it's important to know the power requirements for your MacBook and make sure that the charger and charging cable you are using are properly rated. Using the default charger and cable that came with your MacBook is a no-brainer. This topic is a main consideration if you decide to buy a third-party charger and charging cable. So always check the amp and watts rating on any third-party charger to make sure it meets or exceeds the needs of your MacBook. Also make sure to buy from reputed brands like Ugreen or Anker. In my experience, they are just as good as Apple's charger at a fraction of the cost. The fourth step is charging your MacBook between 20 and 80%. The number one reason why people upgrade their MacBooks is battery degradation. Now granted, all batteries degrade, it's just the laws of physics, but you can control the rate of that degradation to extend the life of your MacBook. Lithium-ion batteries operate at their best in the 20 to 80% charge range. This charging range places the least amount of stress on the battery chemistry, and you're really not giving up anything by doing this. Charging from 20 to 80% is actually quite fast. In fact, it's the last push from 80 to 100% that actually takes more time. And overall, charging between 20 and 80% actually keeps heat levels low, and heat is the enemy of your battery. The cooler you can keep your battery, the longer lasting it will be. Another important metric to keep track of is the charge cycle count. When you use your MacBook, its battery goes through charge cycles. A charge cycle happens when you use all of your battery's power, but this doesn't have to happen in a single discharge. For example, you could use half of your laptop's charge in one day and then recharge it fully. If you did the same thing the next day, that would count as one charge cycle, not two. If you charge your MacBook between 20 and 80%, it might take a few days to complete one charge cycle. Some people will argue that charge cycle count is more important than keeping the charge between 20 and 80%. But in my experience, the two go hand in hand. A battery at 100% charge experiences more chemical stress than at 80%. So when you compare two batteries with identical charge cycle count, but one accumulated that cycle count by charging up to 100% frequently, the one that was charged between 20 and 80% will often have better battery life. My recommendation here is to enable the optimized battery charging feature. By enabling this option, your MacBook will automatically determine the best charge state for your battery based on how you use your machine. Finally, the fifth step is regarding the use of cases and screen protectors. With the switch over to Apple Silicon, MacBooks have received a serious performance bump, and they boasted the best performance to power ratio. But each new generation of Apple Silicon since then has received significant performance bumps as well. With that performance bump also came more power usage, and more power means more heat. For example, when I'm editing videos or doing a final export, the bottom of my MacBook gets hot enough to be uncomfortable to touch. So I make a point of not using it on my lap when I'm doing processor or graphics intensive work. I also place my MacBook on surfaces that either absorb heat or allow for better airflow. And I never place my MacBook on a felt surface because it's too good of an insulating surface and my MacBook cannot release its heat effectively. And like I mentioned before, heat is the enemy of your battery. For this specific reason, I don't place stickers on the underside of my MacBook and I don't use cases. I would rather use a laptop sleeve or a bag to protect my machine when I'm carrying it around. I also avoid using screen protectors because I find that Apple has built these machines with really high precision. A screen protector might stop the screen from properly closing or place pressure on the keyboard. The solution here is to give your MacBook a wipe down with a microfiber cloth once in a while to remove any fine dust. You can also use a compressed air canister to remove debris off the keyboard. If your MacBook has a built-in fan, these steps should also keep the dust intake into the fan to a minimum. And in totality, these 5 steps should help maintain your MacBook for many more years than you thought possible. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next video.